Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We will get started here momentarily. We see a lot of people still joining, so we want to give everybody a minute to get on before we get the presentation started. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar presentation, Calling for Action, How to Track and Measure Sustainable Innovation and Investments. I'm Allie Morton, Head of Field Marketing at LexisNexis Intellectual Property Solutions. We have a really exciting and informative webinar planned for you today. But first, we just need to cover a couple housekeeping things. During the webinar, please feel free to submit questions using the questions feature in the control panel. Also in the control panel, you will see a handout section. This is where you will be able to access the webinar slides from today's presentation and any other handouts. A follow-up email with a recording and slides from today's presentation will be sent out to you later today. Now I would like to introduce our presenter. With us today, we have Marco Richter. Marco is the Global Lead of Product and Customer Success at LexisNexis Intellectual Property Solutions. He has spent the last 10 years helping to build LexisNexis PatentSight, initially working in the consulting business for PatentSight, running projects for DAX 30 and Fortune 500 companies. He also actively drove the transformation of PatentSight into a software company, where he built the data harmonization team and created the consulting and customer success teams. He has strong ties to academia and international patent offices and is actively engaged with global IP leaders and practitioners. Marco is known for embracing continuous change and development to find new opportunities and deliver better outcomes for the innovation community. Thank you again, everyone, for attending today's presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Marco.
Thank you very much. Hi, welcome everybody. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to some night owls that join us from Asia still. So let me first walk you through the agenda that is ahead of us today. As Elliot said, very exciting topic, actually something that has grown to a lot of interest, not just for us here at LexisNexis, but also for many organizations and people worldwide, but we'll get to that in a second. So we'll first introduce the topic of sustainability and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Then we'll talk about a new way that we have started to embrace to objectively measure sustainable innovation. We're going to take a look at the global drivers of the sustainable technological development, and we're going to take a deep dive into one of the Sustainable Development Goals and see who the major contributors and players in this area are, and see what other learnings we can derive from looking at innovation data from the lens of the Sustainable Development Goals. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session. As Ellie had pointed out, please use the chat functions in the GoToWebinar panel to pose any questions that you have. All right. So the floodings and fires that we all saw over the course of the summer in and across Asia, the United States, and many parts of Europe, including Germany, are showing all of us that climate change is becoming a reality and has unfortunately become very impactful to our lives. Also, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has shown us the fragility of our overall ecosystems. The picture that you see on your screen is from these summer floodings, not too far from the office here in Bonn, actually. While none of our colleagues were directly affected, many had people in their families and friends being hurt and hit by the severe floodings that we experienced. So it's becoming a very visible reality, all the change that is going on in our ecosystems. Once considered a matter for governments, NGOs, and international organizations like the United Nations, and a rather niche topic for companies, sustainability is now unquestionably a topic of major concern for businesses, academia, and consumers. The global pandemic and recent velocity, impact, and cadence of natural disasters, with even worsening consequences, we all have begun to feel the growing pressure in our everyday lives for critical action. So we're asking ourselves here at LexisNexis, how can we help this? How can we help the global innovation community to find answers to the challenges of today and to the challenges of tomorrow? How can we support everyone on a path to a more sustainable future? Before we get to the answers of that, let's take a further look at sustainability as a topic and how it entered world stage over the course of the past decades. Sustainability started to appear at the global stage in 1972 and has been getting growing attention in the following decades with big milestones that we all heard about. The 1992 Rio conference, the Kyoto Protocol from 97, and then finally the biggest to date milestone achievement was the 2015 Paris Agreement, where the definition of concrete goals to be achieved by 2013 was struck, the so-called Sustainable Development Goals. These United Nations Sustainable Development Goals represent a collection of 17 interlinked global goals designed to be a blueprint to achieve better and a more sustainable future for all. The SDGs were set up by the General Assembly and are intended to be achieved by the year 2030. And as I just pointed out with the recent catastrophes that happened around us, the topic has reached a new level of urgency for the general public and government regulators. On the right-hand side, you can also see recent examples from such government organizations pushing on the topic, like the Biden administration or the European Commission with its Green Deal initiative. Let me also point out here the Japan Exchange Group coming from a slightly different angle, pushing on a new level of governance reporting, specifically on topics like sustainability and ESG issues. Before we continue, I just want to give you a quick chance to understand what the SDGs that were agreed and defined in 2015 are all about. So here are the 17 goals that were defined by the United Nations. And these goals are supported by 169 target indicators and well over 200 KPIs. And the game changer that they brought to the space was the actionability and the goal focus that is driving these. We'll get to that in a little bit more detail in the next couple minutes. So we've established now an interest by governments, also by the general public. I may also add here, just this past Sunday, I attended a extended family brunch, or with an extended family, I should say. And without me talking about what we're currently doing with regards to our innovation analytics and how we're shedding a new light on sustainability and SDGs, I could hear the conversation around the table being revolving around all sorts of different topics of sustainability in the wider sense all the time. How people started to replace meat with vegetables in their meals, how they're looking to get their homes more energy saving, how they're looking for their new car to be not a fossil fuel driven one, but one that is propelled by electricity, and so on and so forth. It was really interesting to see and observe. This has really become a mainstream topic, and I can also say from the recent general elections here in Germany, the center topic for all parties, and for the first time it wasn't really a niche topic anymore, the center stage topic was, besides the COVID-19 pandemic, the overall drive to more sustainability and initiatives to save our environment. So let's turn to corporates. And we've done some research on our own by looking at the top 100 innovators according to our patent database. And we looked into their annual reports and investor communication pages. And what we found there is that already 75% of companies mention or report on the United Nations SDGs and to many other ESG-bound frameworks. We'll get to the differences between ESG and SDG in just a second. It's an important one, and it's also important to understand the game-changing notion of the SDGs here in this context. Let me quote a Credit Suisse report here in this context. Since 2015, an increasing number of companies are explicitly and proactively addressing SDGs through innovative products and reporting on these efforts. Investors too are using the SDGs as a reference point to align investment and impact goals, and are working with investee companies to measure the impact of their products and services. This has not only added an additional layer of analysis on top of the traditional exclusion and ESG integration data set, it has also led to the creation of a suite of additional attractive investment opportunities that are impact aligned to the SDGs. Let us drill down onto this relevance for businesses and look at it also from other perspectives. PricewaterhouseCoopers has done a study in the area, and what they found was that it's even a decision-making item for customers in their buying behavior. 78% of customers and respondents are more likely to buy from a company that aligns itself with the SDG agenda, that are committing to the goals and the targets that were laid out by the General Assembly. And it's not about a company signing up and agreeing to all of them. Typically, companies choose in what areas they can contribute the best and what's best suited in terms of their areas of business activity. And it further found that 71% of businesses say that they're already planning on how they will engage with the SDGs, or are planning to integrate into their business strategy within the next couple of years. So how can companies communicate better, more transparent about their impact in particular, but also about the assets that they have to make an impact, right? And in order to also avoid greenwashing, how can they deliver facts and true insights to customers? That's a question that we're looking to tackle here today. Further here, the investments necessary to achieve the UN SDGs by 2030 are estimated today to be around $7 trillion a year. And with every year that goes by that we're not getting closer to the goals, that amount will just increase by the year. And that's also investments being made by investment companies and private equity, etc. So these impact-oriented companies that subscribe themselves to the SDGs and try to align their products and services to game-changing cause, they offer solutions to the world's challenges by providing new products, services, approaches, or technology. So where there's a challenge, be it environmental or societal, there's a high likelihood that demand will create a market. Companies focused on generated impact are by necessity working to solve problems that people want solved, right? So in other words, innovators of this world will adapt and adopt to the challenge set out by the market and by the identified solutions. And we'll see that in subsequent investments in R&D, and we'll ultimately also see that in filing behavior and in patents. Before we move into the area of patents, let's first define the differences between the frameworks, the traditional framework of measuring a company's sustainability and corporate governance between ESG and the more recent SDG framework. So ESG has been in place for a couple decades already. It's focusing on environmental, social, and corporate governance areas. And there's a lot of overlap with the United Nations SDGs, and you can see that from the 3 different mappings here that different scholars and consultancies have tried to establish in the past, but there's also gaps between the frameworks, right? And let me again quote Credit Suisse here in the context to explain the shift that has taken place right now from ESG to SDG, because it ultimately comes down to a shift from process and policies, which the ESG frameworks mainly provide, to a framework about delivering positive and measuring positive contribution, which the SDGs represent. So companies are increasingly exploring the positive impact of their products on society and the degree to which these products are directly helping achieve societal or environmental objectives. And this was catalyzed by the inception and creation of the United Nations SDGs in 2015. So also the investment market sees a big shift happening, both in reporting terms since then, but also in the demand on the investee side. To sum up the differences between ESG and SDG, and to come to an agreement or come to a common understanding here, why we have chosen a path to map all world patent data to the SDGs in order to assess the impact of nations, countries, organizations, and technologies on a potentially more sustainable future. We settled finally on the SDGs because it's a globally accepted and acknowledged framework, whereas for the ESG, there's as many frameworks and as many definitions as there's organizations issuing them. So there is no common alignment across the ESG frameworks. There's also clear goals in the SDG framework that are target oriented, while ESG is more process and less target oriented. And finally, due to the codification and the unique approach of the SDGs, it allows us to distinctly map patentable, novel, and innovative technologies, whereas with the ESG framework, we would always be even more subjective depending on the framework we chose or the aspect that we're looking at. So why considering innovation and patents in this context? Well, patents are by their nature innovations, forward-looking, the result of problem-solving oriented research. Patents can point us in the right direction to understand which innovations address our current and future challenges. Also, there's a continuous allocation of resources towards R&D, being it propelled by increasing market demand or by a company's decision and business strategy, which is a direct cause and effect with market needs as well. So patents, from our point of view, are an exceptional lens for making these investments visible. But not only that, the technological solutions that already exist are a great proxy to tell us what solutions are the most promising ones and who's in a position to leverage these to solve the problems that we and challenges that we're currently facing, but also for the ones that are lying ahead of us. So now we heard a lot about the different frameworks and acronyms, and we've established the topic of sustainability, have also established and understood the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now let's take a look at how we went about and mapped that to global patent information. So what we did on a high level is we looked at the supporting material, the documentation of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, namely the targets, the indicators, and the supporting metadata, and went very thoroughly through all the material and created links in the language between the targets and the outcomes described in the material and what we could identify from a patent perspective in terms of supporting technology. For the patent analysts and the patent searchers in the audience, what we basically did under the hood is we turned the targets, the indicator descriptions, and the metadata into very comprehensive Boolean searches that support these 17 goals. And overall, these are then supported by 97 sub-searches that fuel all these 17 goals. What you see here on the screen now is the result of that mapping. Not only a beautiful visualization, but a very easy to access level of insight on sustainable innovation through the lens of patents. So with this mapping, we as LexisNexis are again pioneering. We're following great examples with regards to the contributions to the United Nations as an overall organization, but also the Sustainable Development Goals in particular. RELX, as an umbrella company above LexisNexis and Elsevier, has not only been an early signatory to the United Nations Global Compact, it has also, through LexisNexis, been a founding supporter of the United Nations Global Compact Action Platform on Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions, which provides a global business standard to efforts towards understanding, implementing, and reporting on business engagement related to SDG 16, namely peace and justice. As the world continues its work toward achieving the SDGs, LexisNexis will also continue its partnership with UNGC and other UN entities which seek to advance the elements of the rule of law and measure progress on the same. Now, with our patent mapping, we're building on these strong roots and contribute to the advancement and the adoption of the SDG goals even further on a completely new level. So how does this help innovators around the globe, investment organizations around the globe, but also supporting consultancies and law firms address the challenges and help technology-driven companies? Well, with our mapping to the United Nations SDGs, we're bringing measurability to the area of sustainable innovation. So patent data is an important source to measure a company's contribution and its potential towards a sustainable world. So we're establishing measurability. We're bringing also transparency, right? In the world of sustainability reporting, there's always complaints about companies organizations greenwashing themselves, claiming to do good but actually not doing good. Now, with our patent to SDG mapping, we're achieving a level of transparency that is unparalleled in, for example, the world of ESG reporting, which heavily relies, for example, on questionnaires that are then subject to interpretation. Patents are a global measure, patents are transparent, and patents put us in a very unique position to not only identify innovators, but also challenge innovators on their efforts and also their abilities. We're also bringing valuation to the world of sustainable innovation analytics with our proprietary metric that we have developed that I will establish with the audience in just a few minutes, the Patent Asset Index. We can reveal the true innovators, we can reveal hidden champions, and we can spot opportunities that are unseen in regular patent information. And last but not least, by the mapping itself, we're again solving a problem that is oftentimes solved by lots of manual effort. We're bringing accessibility to the data in the first place, right? A lot of our users could actually start to create these definitions and mappings themselves, but it's a very cumbersome process. And as you will see in some of the customer feedback we've been receiving, people are blown away by the level of detail that we put towards the mapping and the amount of work that we put into it. So accessibility is, last but not least, an important achievement of this mapping and of the problem we're solving here. Now, all of that couldn't have been done if we weren't already in a position where we had solved the underlying problems of patent information, because none of the analytics, none of the insights that we would dare to drive could be enabled without overcoming fundamental problems of the patent system and of legacy patent databases. These problems include the incomplete ownership information in patent information. Patents do not tell you to which organization they necessarily belong. There's all sorts of problems associated with them. One problem that is easy to understand for everybody is there's no corporate hierarchy attached to a patent. So if it's filed by a subsidiary or by an acquired company, it doesn't necessarily pop up in the General Electric portfolio, in a General Electric search in a classical database. Further, ambiguous legal status information makes it very difficult to assess who has significant or meaningful assets in an area, as again patent data doesn't reveal in itself to the layman user or to the expert user whether a patent is still in force or not. Also, patent information traditionally provides no accurate trend analysis other than looking at filing or publication activity. And last but not least, there has been no good way to establish and calculate value and impact of patent portfolios. If there were approaches, they were mostly black box and only achieved part of what they claim to do. But the good news is, as I said earlier, we're in a position, we have already solved these problems before we even tended to the area of sustainable innovation analytics. So we've mapped all patents to their worldwide owners. We're bringing industry-leading legal status interpretation to the data. We make point-in-time analysis available, again, in the light of the analytics that we want to drive. It's very important to understand the true trends in order to make any statements or create any what-if scenarios if we project into the future. And last but not least, we have developed the scientifically proven, completely laid open and industry-wide adopted indicator around the patent asset index that helps us to find the gems in a patent portfolio or in a technology area. Let me introduce the patent asset index here to you because it's going to be an important part once we dive into some analyses that we were driving with the data. The patent asset index is based on two main components. One called technology relevance, which looks at all the forward citations a patent receives, and the other one called market coverage, which looks at the economic potential and the size of the potential markets that a patent family protects. The technology relevance looks at all the forward citations a patent receives, but takes care of the three major fallacies when it comes to citation analyses. So it takes care of the H effect, it takes care of the technology field effect. So in other words, we're comparing apples with apples and oranges with oranges. And it takes care of different citation behaviors and patterns between patent offices, so that at the end of the day, we get to a normalized indicator that is always benchmarked against the average in its respective fields, age groups, etc., etc. So when you come across a patent with a technology relevance of 3, you know it's 3 times more valuable than the average in its field, with 1 marking the average. Market coverage, the concept behind that is very similar. We want to go beyond just counting. So instead of counting number of filing countries, you're looking at the economic potential of a country. There's a lot of business decision making, not only going into patent filing as such, but also into where in the world are we filing, if we're filing. And companies employ different strategies for different groups of patents. The more important ones get filed more broadly and in the larger economies. So we're trying to reflect that by overcoming the counting problem and looking at the size of the national economies. We're using World Bank data to assess that. And we simply aggregate the value of these economies depending on the size of the families and the coverage chosen for the particular invention. So to give you any idea here, a patent that is filed and protected in the United States has a market coverage of 1. And since the Chinese economy is roughly 70% of the size of the US economy, I granted Chinese patent that sits in the same family at 0.7, so an overall score of 1.7 to that family. The 2 scores of technology relevance and market coverage are then multiplied and give us the competitive impact, the overall impact of a patent family, taking into account its technological advantage, but also its economic potential as determined by the patent owner. And then ultimately, we can sum up the competitive impact scores in a portfolio and derive the patent asset index, the overall innovative strength of the company or the technology or the company in the technology. So by the way I've been describing this, you can already defer. We can slice and dice the data really in any way that we like. Now this database that we have created and the software built on top around all these indicators has been employed and used by many blue chip companies across the globe. Just a few public examples here. And I would just like to point out the European Commission's use in merger and acquisition scenarios. And again, just pointing out 2 here, the Bayer Monsanto and Dow DuPont scenarios. And the reason I point these 2 out is because they marked a game-changing moment in merger regulation. There's an article on Bloomberg that says this was the first time the Commission went beyond just what's currently going on in the market and beyond what's in the company's product pipelines, but really used patents as a proxy for future market situations and potential stifling of innovation. So the European Commission many years ago already employed this data to make projections into the future and derive decisions today for potential outcomes tomorrow and beyond. So in other words, we can apply the same logic here to sustainable innovation analytics and can be pretty sure that what we can see in the data and in the value-added data that we're aggregating today help us make the right choices and place the right bets to be prepared for future challenges. Before we go into particular examples here, I would just like to bring us all on the same page with the thinking around sustainability, the Sustainable Development Goals. I guess we all get that, right? There are certain goals set out, companies subscribe to them, they report on them, etc. But you might ask, what kind of role does data play? And I think, and patent data like patent information as well, right? Like, what role can it play? And I think it can play an immense role, right? Like I just said before, we can use it as a proxy to understand what are the drivers of future problem solving, not only from a technology perspective, also which are the organizations that are fit for the future challenges, who's placing the right bets today. And just to read from the slide here, without knowing how much we're making progress, we'll not be able to know where we're going, right? And this is going beyond just patent counting. It really goes into evaluating and placing the right bets and making the right moves. So let's look at the global drivers of sustainable technological development. And first off, I will introduce to you the SDG dashboard that we have created based on the data. Those of you who know our solutions know we're always all in, right? There's no limits to our analytics. There's no limits to our searches. There's no limits to our visualization. So whatever amount of data we want to use in our views, we can do so. And let me walk you quickly through what we can see here. So in the top left, we see how the area of sustainable innovation, so all the patents mapped to SDGs, have developed since the year 2000. And we see that both portfolio size, so the number of active patents at a point in time, and patent asset index have continuously increased. And especially since the mid 2010s, we see a very sharp increase in both, right? So in other words, sustainable innovation is not only getting more or becoming more, it's also becoming more and more valuable. We also see here in the middle, in the top line in the middle, we see that it's companies predominantly driving sustainable innovation, right? Most of the assets in the area of the over 3 million patents are coming out of corporate R&D. So in other words, we're looking to the corporates around the world to be most likely in a position to find most of the answers. And we also see that reflected in the patent asset index, right, which by far exceeds the size of the patent portfolios here for companies. So in other words, on average, the corporate patents in the SDGs are much more valuable than the research or the government-owned and controlled patents in the area. On the right-hand side, another depiction of the trend we're seeing on the left, but in this case here also in comparison with the size of the overall active patent portfolios in the world. So you can also see there that sustainable innovation has outgrown other areas. It's now over 20% of all active patents, despite the number of active patents also having grown significantly over the course of the past 20 years. Then you see a breakdown into the into the SDGs and the number of patents in each of the areas that we were able to identify as actively driving contribution towards these. Then in the middle down here, you see a comparison of average quality, so average competitive impact of patents that are SDG related or not SDG related. And that's one of the most interesting finds for me personally, to see that the patent asset index seems to evaluate patents higher that can be linked to sustainable innovation. And it's not just by a margin, it's by 50%. So patents that are not belonging to sustainable innovation are even below average of 1, and the other patents are well above the average of 1. And then last but not least, we can see from a technology perspective, what are the major drivers of sustainable innovation? So in which technological areas and pockets do we see most of the contribution coming from? So it's from information technologies, but it's also from chemistry, electronics, and healthcare, which as a whole make up close to 60% of sustainable innovation efforts. And now, from this high-level view, let's take it to the country level, and let's see in which areas the top 5 countries, and you see these on the y-axis, the United States, China, Japan, Germany, and South Korea, are contributing to which of the Sustainable Development Goals. We map the patent data to the countries in this case by going with the inventor address, so basically with the home address of the inventor. And again, for the experts in the room, there could be double counting here if we have inventors from the United States and Germany, China collaborating on a patent for sure. And while we see by and large very similar patterns, we also see that the United States by far exceeds the efforts of the other players here in SDG 3, good health and well-being, and that China is, for example, extremely strong in SDG 09, innovation infrastructure, and so on and so forth. Now, we can take that a level down from the countries to the corporates. So only looking at corporates, excluding any university efforts. We see on the y-axis now, we're basically looking at the same data, but instead of the country level view, we're seeing the corporate view on the y-axis. And we're seeing, for example, Johnson & Johnson being particularly strong in SDG 3, which is to be expected, right? Good health and well-being. But LG Chem, for example, being strong in climate action, and that goes down to battery technology, which is an important driver in the change from a fossil fuel fleet and roadway transportation to electrically propelled vehicles. And this SDG 13 is also the one that I'd like to use to go down further on and look at the top innovators in the area, which is generally described as climate action. So these are, in absolute terms, the top 10 contributors to that area. And then instead of ranking them by their absolute patent asset index in the area, we look at what share of the overall company's portfolios in terms of patent asset index is part of, is represented here, right? So the way to read this is that with Vestas, we're seeing a company here that is highly focused on SDG 13. 90% of their overall corporate portfolio strength is geared towards SDG 13, which is to be expected because Vestas is a wind energy company, right? They build these massive wind turbines that create electricity from wind. And then we see Samsung SDI, LG Chem, and so on and so forth, and further down, Samsung and Bosch. That does not mean by any means that either Samsung or Bosch contribute little to SDG 13. In absolute terms, they do a lot. They have a lot of important technologies to propel SDG 13. It's just that their overall portfolios are so large that it makes only 3 and 12% respectively that falls into the area of SDG 13 climate action, right? So you can use the data to find champions, focused companies on certain areas. You can also use the data for competitive intelligence. You see which of your competitors is contributing to what area. You can use it to analyze suppliers. You can use it to benchmark with your competitors. You can use it to uncover trends. You can also use it to find technologies in your own portfolio that contribute to areas that you didn't even think about because they're not your core area, or they don't necessarily fit into your core business area. Think for example of our Apple Watch example, where we see technology spillover from the watch industry into smartwatch and the supporting technologies, right? Where Apple doesn't hold traditional watch technologies, but is making strong references and is building up on traditional watch technologies. And we have uncovered similar trends in this SDG mapping data here, identifying companies and their technologies that support their main businesses that fall into areas where we wouldn't have naturally thought about in the first place, but that made absolute sense once we looked at the underlying technologies, that they could also be used in a different context for the way to a more sustainable future. So from this view here, let's take the level deeper and let's look at Toyota. As we heard earlier in the presentation, companies are already reporting on their sustainability efforts, and they're already communicating progress, and they're also subscribing and signing up for various SDGs. And what you see on the screen right now is a screenshot from Toyota's investor relations websites and annual report. And you see various SDGs that they're subscribing to. Also SDG 13 here, you see that on the top, and we can call out here the claim they're making holds true when we're looking at it from a technology lens. Almost 24% of their technologies are directly supporting SDG 13, right? And we can take this further. We can look at the overall Toyota portfolio. This is all of Toyota, what you see on the left-hand side now. And once the chart starts moving, you see an area, affordable and clean energy, SDG 07, to which they do not claim contribution in their communication, but to which they heavily contribute. So either known or unknown to Toyota, I cannot say, but it's definitely, from my point of view, a missed opportunity where they could communicate the strength of their assets in the area of hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles that we all know about. And if we look at the right-hand side, we can also see why SDG 7 pops up here, right? Like in the supporting material, in the metadata from the United Nations, in the policy brief on the SDG 7 achievements, hybrid electric vehicles and electric vehicles are specifically called out as important drivers for more sustainable road transportation. And as I shared earlier with the example of companies not being aware of how their technologies contribute to areas they didn't even think about, there even seem to be pockets of areas where companies must know about, but where they fail to communicate at the moment. Now, I would like to come to an end of the presentation, and when we put our concept together here, when we put the supporting material here together for today's presentation, we thought about the key takeaways, and we quickly realized it's probably not us that should formulate the key takeaways. What I would instead like to share with you is what our customers have told us about the work that we've done here. We gave our customers the chance already 3 weeks ago as an internal customer-only release to start using the patent to SDG mapping, the unique visualizations and analytics capabilities that we built as enablers for these. And I can tell you, we're blown away by the feedback that we're receiving. Here's just a few examples from the worldwide customer feedback that we've been receiving over the past 3 weeks. And I can also share that our business development and consulting teams probably have no other topic in customer communication and customer interaction anymore, other than the patent to SDG mapping and how to get even more insights out of it. Let me point out 3 examples here. All happen to be on the bottom of the page. The ones that I like a lot, it's about this one here. Sustainability is a common issue which comes up actively. We're actively looking to use the PatentSight SDG in C and board level discussion. This is directly coming from a head of IP who's thrilled to being able to address this business challenge with supporting information from his department. Then in the lower left here, I just want to make sure it's being seen. We have companies, and this is just one example, who are already actively implementing a investor-facing and public-facing KPI built on the data that we're providing. And for any of you who've been involved in investor relations in a company and publishing information officially, you know how difficult and hard that is, right? And then on top of that, even establishing a KPI is just a great example for me how much trust we were able to build over the past couple of years and how much trust we already gained in the last couple of weeks with this customer-facing release. And then last but not least, the lower right here, having just been asked by top management to check our portfolio in relation to SDGs. This is very useful. The objective criteria of SDGs is very important because we tend to create results that fit our own good image. That was also for me very interesting again and very eye-opening, right? Because you could easily fall into a trap of seeing things through the way your corporate looks at things. We ourselves often do market studies that we sometimes don't disagree with initially. And then as we think about the results that come back, or customer surveys, and the results that come back, and try to look through different lenses, we need to agree that we need to continue to challenge ourselves. So these kind of data points can also serve as a sanity check and sort of a compass for ingrained opinions and viewpoints. And with that, I would like to thank the audience for attending today, and would like to give you the opportunity to ask a couple questions, if any. And I see a couple came in. Let me just take a look there. Oh, yeah. So lots of questions around, if I could sum this up here, around the mapping itself and how we went about it and the availability of the search strings. So let me try to zoom out again and back to that part of the presentation. So the way we conducted the mapping was by looking at the supporting material from the United Nations and understanding the goals that are to be achieved and the way and the path described to get to these goals, right? Like sometimes specific technologies are called out and are being defined. Sometimes certain sorts of diseases are being named, right? When we're thinking about reducing mortality rates, et cetera, and going through the material, we try to stay very, very close to what is being described and transform that and implement that into the search string. So as I said earlier, into Boolean full text queries, and as part of that also IPC classes and CPC classes to support the search strings. But to reiterate again, all very closely aligned with what we see in the goals, in the indicators, and in the metadata that was provided by the, or is continuously provided by the United Nations. Now I'll just pick up a couple of questions related to that, because it's also a recurring theme, right, when we talk to customers about the mapping itself. So we do not look at this mapping as set in stone forever. We do recognize that also the view of the United Nations change with regards to the definitions, and is constantly adapting and adopting them, simply because also technology evolves, right? We find new solutions, and these solutions have to be reflected in the SDGs. But we're always referring back to the United Nations here, and we do not add technologies just because we think they will help us achieve the goal. We are looking to changes being made by the UN here in that case. And we've already been in active customer communication where these topics came up, that the customer knows they're holding a key technology, but it's not been recognized by the UN yet, which even resulted in a particular customer trying to engage more actively with the United Nations in order for these recent trends to be reflected, and which I think is another great way of our work here contributing to the achievement of the SDGs. And I said I would try to wrap a couple of questions here around the searching and the mapping topic. The other question, and I see it here in the chat too, that comes up in the light, is are the search strings themselves. So we're not publishing the search strings themselves, so the actual definition, but We have very extensive support material created that in a lot of detail explain what technologies are supporting the SDG. So basically a synthesis of what we've read in the United Nations material. We're also giving examples of keywords and IPCs and thorough examples of these. But the way we ultimately build and define the string itself that defines the search, that we keep under the hood on the database level and not accessible to the end user. Let me see. Yeah, are we talking to government authorities already about this, or to patent offices? Yes and yes. So we're talking to both patent offices, but also government authorities and also NGOs in the area around sustainable reporting, sustainable development metrics, and so on and so forth. So a lot of very broad interest on the topic. And what I feel is happening here, that many organizations out there knew, or it's an established, it's a common knowledge that innovation is a key for a sustainable future. Yet one of the most important sources of innovation information, namely patents, has been locked for these stakeholders simply due to the nature of patents, the language being very ambiguous, very legally and hard to read, and of the underlying data problems. Last but not least, the lacking mapping to the SDGs, but also the 4 other major problems that I shared earlier that we're overcoming. And it's really like we're opening a door to a new era here for these stakeholders, both on the government side, but also in the wider sustainability community, to give them access to this unique data and make it an important piece of their decision and ultimately also their policy making, especially when we think about government organizations. Okay, and I realize we're approaching the top of the hour here. I would again like to thank all the attendants today. Great to see such broad interest, both from customers and those who are yet to become customers, but also to see broad interest from not just patent filers, but also we realize a lot of investment focused organizations here, and also a couple of NGOs that we have started talking to. So glad to see you guys all here. And with that, thank you very much. Have a very good rest of your day and hope to speak to you soon again. Bye-bye.